Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us here at Cloud Wars Live, where we explore digital business and digital innovation by speaking with the people helping to change how the world lives, plays, works, and dreams. Our guest today is Dan Giurleo of Care.com, a high-growth online marketplace for caregivers and the families who need them. Dan's helped Care.com establish a modern, cloud-based financial system to manage its growth and to provide transparency. Dan, welcome to Cloud Wars Live.
Thank you, Bob.
Good to have you. Tell us a little bit about, there's two interesting threads we want to look at here. One is this very interesting company you're with and the needs that they had at the time when they brought you in. And then also, Dan, throughout that, you've got an interesting relationship yourself with this company. So just tell us a little bit about the background there.
Sure. So Care.com, as many people may know, is an online marketplace to match families that are seeking quality care providers. So the business has actually been around 10 years, but certainly in the last 5, there's been some significant growth. And around that time, management realized their existing infrastructure wasn't going to support the growth. So there were a number of, and speaking from the finance perspective now, there were a number of disparate systems that were standalone, highly manual business processes that required lots of effort from the various departments to try to pull all the data together for consolidated financial purposes. So we brought the close down pretty significantly by about 4 days, I believe.
Okay.
So the CFO is now getting numbers on his desk much quicker. Not only that, there's a high level of confidence in those numbers, right? It's because when you have manual manipulation, there's always room for error.
Yeah.
Whereas if the majority of the transactions, the reporting is coming directly from the system, and everyone is using a consistent data model and is processing the transactions the same way, in the control environment that we've defined within Workday, then he's got a high level of confidence that the numbers he's looking at are accurate.
Yeah. So speed, accuracy, and also I think there would have been something that, as I was doing a little research on this, where he said there was a huge amount of manual labor involved, right, for people trying to get things together from the other places, consolidate them, and you got some pretty smart people on the team there, and it's a shame to have them doing this sort of work that's not adding a lot of value. So what are they able to do now that's different?
Their role transitions from, as you say, administrative and process oriented to more analytical oriented, right? So, when we bring in a degreed accountant, we'd ideally like them to be leveraging their technical accounting skills, not how quickly can they type into a spreadsheet, right? So that has really been the biggest change.
Yeah, I think I've heard some companies talk about, if you get not just so much the technology, right, but the technology underpinning the processes that allow you to do things that way. It's like for the finance organization, you can flip the arrow of time instead of the systems being built around the notion of let me reconcile what has already happened, to being one that says we can clearly do that, but we're also going to help provide intelligence toward what's coming, help us be smart about where things are headed, how to allocate resources, and so on. So is that something Care.com is able to do?
Certainly. So, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
So to the extent that we can give management meaningful data sooner, and again with a high level of confidence, then they're certainly better positioned to make kind of those forward-looking decisions that are impactful.
Okay. Now, Dan, one of the other things that had come up here was, again, companies growing quickly. They needed to get, some of their processes and technology up in place, moving into the cloud. So you've talked some about on the financial side, and then there was also the HR component. And could you explain a little bit about how that worked and the synergies across the two?
Sure. So again, my background is finance, so I can't speak into great detail, but certainly, dialing the clock back 5 years when the company was looking at where they were from a back office infrastructure perspective and looking forward, HR was actually in even a worse position than finance, simply because they didn't have a system. So they had some basic functionality from ADP, and everything else was paper files or spreadsheets. So again, from a growth perspective, in terms of being able to attract and maintain a quality workforce and being able to manage that effectively, we need to give both our HR department as well as our operational managers the tools to do that. So again, you may know that Workday started with HR prior to finance, and certainly had a strong reputation even at that point. So from the HR side, Workday was an easy sale. Finance were not big risk takers, so it took us a little bit longer to get comfortable with it, especially at that time the product was still relatively new, but obviously we got there.
So you would have been among the first 40 or 50 or so companies that committed to Workday Financials.
So I don't. We were certainly within the first 100. I don't know what the exact number was.
Yeah, and just, Dan, could you talk about that a little? You said, and the financial professionals are not the type that always sort of rush toward the risk. So what were a couple of the things that made you fully comfortable that this is the right way to go?
So speaking personally, I've worked with a number of kind of legacy ERP platforms, so PeopleSoft, Oracle, Great Plains, and by and large, there's architecture of that era had to have a similar pattern, right, or a similar flow to how it's structured and how transactions are processed. And sitting through some of the early Workday demos, certainly there was some similarities, but it became obvious to me pretty quickly that Workday really was kind of the next generation of kind of thought and design around financial ERPs. So when we looked at kind of the business process orientation, and as I mentioned earlier, the work tag flexibility that allows the system to adapt to the business, as opposed to in the legacy ERPs, oftentimes it was the other way around. Light bulbs just started going off in my head. I'm thinking, I said, wow, if I had this 5 years ago or 10 years ago, that things would have been very different in terms of our support model and the amount of resources we needed to maintain the system. That design architecture kind of overshadowed kind of the general uneasiness of investing in a platform that was still relatively new. That said, when we looked at Workday's competition and established long-term players that had migrated their product to the cloud, basically my personal take on that was that they had taken their on-premises system and just put it in the cloud, but many of those same limitations that resided with the legacy system still existed. And so you could go the safe route and still have those limitations, or you could be bold and move forward. And so obviously we decided to be more aggressive with that. And then so kind of getting past that initial level of discomfort. But then as we started to really drill in and look at specific use cases, the gaps actually were not that many. They were actually less than we were expecting. Now, for certain, there were still a handful that we acknowledged, and in Workday's defense was very transparent about, and also very proactive with where those gaps would be addressed on the roadmap. And so now, 3 years later, having been live, I think there's only one left on that list that still hasn't been addressed.
Okay. Dan, that gets sort of in the direction of trust. There's the technology factor that has to be right, and then this notion of trust, both about will the technology do what it says? Do I understand as a buyer where this technology provider, my partner here, is actually going? And that's one thing that I believe distinguishes Workday in a number of ways, that level of trust that people have. Because I've heard, not just you said it here and others, Workday was very open about it, said, here are the things we can do, here are the things we're not going to do, or it's going to be a ways down the road. So it seems in that notion of managing the risk, making the right decision, jumping on board a platform that's going to take you through the high growth times, very comfortably, to the degree you're able to sort of buy in on the trust, that had to be a huge part of it.
It was. Our CFO at the time was, obviously business relationships are important, and this is a significant investment. So our account executive at Workday made certain that our CFO was comfortable and brought in the appropriate resources from the appropriate levels at Workday, to get him there on the finance side. I'd say HCM was less so because it was more of a proven product at that point. And the other thing we were a bit concerned about is, on the scale of size of client, care, even more so then, was kind of on the smaller end of that scale, and we were concerned about what sort of attention we would get or priority would get. And honestly, I cannot recall feeling like we were a small fish to Workday, that we were a business partner and that they were engaged with us and that they were committed to our success. And so, if we had an issue, I feel like we got the same attention as, a $500 million company did.
Yeah. And Dan, could you take us through a little bit, the journey, because you said there's the sort of the core financials and then some additional products from the financial suite that have come on?
Yes, so subsequent to the initial finance launch, we implemented payroll, Workday Payroll, which was a year ago now, as a matter of fact. We went live with payroll. And so, the work tag, the power of one, that was the primary driver. So, we had ADP historically, but having all of our HR and finance data on one platform, but then still having to extract our payroll data proved to be less efficient. So we have spoiled with our access to all of the data within Workday. That aside, just the customer service challenges with ADP, again, a large company with being a smaller player, proved to be frustrating after a while. So bringing all of that in-house under our control made good sense to us. So we ended up moving forward with that, and we've been live for a year now.
Okay. Anything else you're looking at that you can talk about?
So we also implemented Workday Planning.
Yeah.
So that's earlier this year. We went live with that over the summer.
Okay.
So similar to our financial experience a number of years ago, Workday was fairly transparent with, this is a new product, you're an early adopter, there are some significant gaps, and that certainly proved to be the case.
Right.
That said, based on our historic experience with the rest of financials, we were confident that Workday would get there. And we did our own internal evaluation and concluded we could live with those gaps in the short term. Of course, now, recent announcement that we're migrating to a different, with the acquisition of Adaptive, that product will now essentially replace what we implemented. So it kind of remains to be seen what that means for us. I suspect we will end up either implementing Adaptive or take the opportunity to look at other options.
Right.
But at this point, I still think the overriding benefit of having everything reside on one platform is still a significant and persuasive reason to seriously consider Adaptive.
Okay. And Dan, I think that your personal story here with Care.com is an interesting one, because you clearly become sort of a spokesman for the company in some ways about some of these things that are going on with it. And it's been a 5-year relationship, but you're not an employee. Is that right?
Well, no. So actually, technically, I am an employee.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm considered what's the phrase? Fixed-term employee.
Okay.
So that implies that my job is tied to projects that
I see
that come along.
Okay. And that started, I think you had said it was going to be, somebody said, hey, just come work with us for a little bit, but it's evolved into something much bigger than that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it was specifically focused on initially evaluating a new ERP platform and then helping with the implementation. But I guess I kind of got the Workday bug, because I really I'm a fan of the technology, and I'm a fan of Care.com as well. So the company's culture, their mission, the investment that they're willing to make sure that they're well positioned for growth, and to leverage, to provide that transparency across the organization to better empower their management. All of that activity aligns with my own kind of business philosophy and values. So yeah, it's been a great partnership or a relationship on both sides.
Great. And Dan, we're here at Workday Rising in Las Vegas. What have you seen here that's sort of top of mind for you?
Yeah, so Rising is always a good opportunity to reconnect with the rest of the ecosystem of Workday. So in terms of the formal presentations, it seems the theme is around artificial intelligence and machine learning, and so leveraging the existing data to provide more insight to the significance of the numbers, but then also potentially automating some transactions that formerly would have required manual intervention. So that's exciting. It feels like it's still a ways away as that technology evolves, but it's certainly an area that, although I've read about artificial intelligence, I never really made the connections to how that would apply in an accounting team, for example, or driving financial close efficiencies. But they brought up some pretty interesting use cases that are intriguing. So I'll look forward to seeing how those evolve. The informal part of these is also just interacting with the other customers, right, and understanding some of their wins and some of their challenges and how they've managed it, and hearing some of their journeys in terms of how they arrived at where they are. So it's for the people that are just starting out, I think, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that phase. I remember that look of discomfort. And then some of the the longer term players like us that I still bump into. We can share some of our successes and how we continue to leverage and take advantage of the investment that Workday makes to continually evolve the product and to solve problems or to just gain efficiencies.
So Dan, any other topic that you wanted to be sure to touch on before we wrap up?
I guess what I would say in closing is that any ERP, Workday or not, you get out what you put in, right? And I think Workday's philosophy of these biannual releases give you it gives you the opportunity to take advantage of new technology, but in most cases it's optional, so it's not essentially shoved down your throat. So that approach, I think, is very smart in a cloud-based platform where it's important to have everybody on the same quote version, yet you can configure, it's a cafeteria, you can configure what you need based on your priorities and your pain points. That I think is another big win for Workday customers.
Okay, well Dan, thank you very much. This has been a great conversation.
All right, my pleasure.
Thanks, and I just want to thank all of you out there for listening to this episode of Cloud Wars Live, where we talk about this rapidly changing world, digital innovation, and companies and the people that are changing really how the world works, lives, plays, dreams, and reinvents itself. Dan, thanks very much. Good to see you.
You're welcome. Thank you.